So the song starts off with an intro by AZ and Nas talking about how life revolves around money, but then also the suspenseful question, money and then what? The money-oriented life is reinforced by AZ starting off with the verses visualizing the realism of life and actuality, and concluding that everything depends on salary and the status that one has. This material conditioning of life determines not only AZ, but his entire generation to adopt a money-oriented lifestyle. He goes on to say that the adoption of this lifestyle, even though it has its risks, can also have its gains. He goes on to say, just like Nas will later on, that some of them are either doing years or stacking papers, but this is not the relevant part. The relevant part is that all of this leads and hypes up the chorus line. And it says that we all do this because someday we gotta die. The chorus is actually a repetition, an affirmation of the misery of life, followed by death, and that being the reason why we get high and puff rye. Now, the repetition tends to suggest that there's nothing more important than this, that the misery of life is described beforehand by AZ, by the struggle of it, the struggle to attain a certain status, but life being a bitch is actually life being followed by death. Death which relativizes everything, which leads one to a neutral kind of attitude in life, an attitude in which only getting high can get you through the misery of life and the acceptance of death. Before I go further with the interpretation of the song, I want to take a look at Nas's part too. Now, opposite to AZ, Nas starts off by acknowledging the good stuff in his life, the success he's been granted, the money he has, which is also celebrated and reflected in his physical form. But then in the second part, he gets to the relative part of life in which people he used to hang with are either rich or doing years. This is reinforced by him telling us how he used to sell drugs, how he used to hustle, and also how contingent success is. He talks about people winning the lotto, or could have won the lotto, but ended up on the streets. Let's see what this all tells us. So it seems that Nas recognizes the contingency of life, which also, in his lyrics, motivates him to keep a gun at his side all times to deal with this contingency of life. And this is directly followed by the chorus line, life's a bitch and then you die. The chorus line also contains a verse which points out the contingency in itself, because life's a bitch and then we die, and you never know when you're gonna go. This is an important aspect of it. It seems then that both AZ and Nas build up to a chorus line. The build-up is to show how contingent life is and how relevant everything is, how we strive towards attaining wealth or status, and how this is relativized by death in itself. This, however, I think can be understood with Heidegger as having death and the consciousness of our own mortality determine the way we relate to life, that we understand its contingency, but in the same moment we understand that our mortality also defines our struggles. We struggle somehow to move away from that contingency, from our own condition, by striving for more, which in itself reinforces the contingency. In our struggles, we just become the victims of contingency, relativity of life, and part of the money-oriented system, which either makes us rich or makes us do years in the hundreds. So I think that what AZ and Nas are actually, well, not consciously, but they do reflect somehow the condition of our society and our human nature as being conditioned by mortality, and understanding that we do everything to get away from this, even though we know we cannot get away from this. And this is why the chorus line also includes, that's why we get high. So that's why we stop striving, we stop struggling, because we know we're not going to achieve anything with that, only contingent relative means to deal with our own mortality. The struggle of life can also be understood with Sartre, who thought that the consciousness of pure contingency leads one to accept nihilism, But this also leads one to turn to a sort of responsibility to oneself. This, however, might be contradicted by Nas and AZ, given that they also have a community-oriented way of life. This can also be understood through the spectrum of mortality, given that our actions are defined from future references to our mortality. So actions are defined from the future to the present, and that leads Nas and AZ not only to describe life, but also to represent life and to represent the possibilities of life. This representing aspect of it being a major part of their lyrics and the Illmatic album. So to round everything up, the song has like a cyclical structure in which the song opens up with like the material conditioning of human nature, which leads to relativity and contingency, and this all is put in the frame of mortality, which defines our reality and actuality, because it defines how our struggles come to be in life. The consciousness of this leads us also to adopt a more relaxed state of mind by getting high, by breaking off with this human nature of striving and achieving.